feel like this movie gets unnecessary hate. I get it, a lot of people don't think it's as good as the original, and maybe down the line I'll put out a video comparing those two versions and see which one's better, the 1972 version versus the 2017 version. But for right now, I'm going to put out a review for the one that I personally like and watch, and that is the 2017 version of Murder on the Orient Express. So anyone who's been following this channel would know I'm a fan of mystery stories. Like I did with my Hannibal video. I will try not to go into spoilers at first, but like any good mystery story, you eventually have to go into spoilers to talk about, because the twist at the end of this, I'll explain later, but I quite enjoyed it. So with that being said, let's jump into what is the basic story. We follow a detective.
My name is Hercule Poirot, and I am probably the greatest detective in the world.
Who has a glorious mustache, way better than my facial hair I have going. And he's able to solve these crimes. He's kind of like Sherlock Holmes. He's able to solve these crimes. He has OCD so bad that he can't stand when stuff are not perfectly balanced. So he's able to see when the little details are like, okay, that's not perfectly balanced. I mean, you open with him checking to make sure his eggs are perfectly the right size. And I will say, this won't be a spoiler, but that is a lesson he learns through the movie, and we'll get into more in the spoiler section. Why? About learning how sometimes balance is not always perfect. So he goes and he gets a ride on this train that's run by his friend, and while he's on the train, a murder happens. And now he has to solve this murder in his special Hercule Poirot way. So you're following him as he's finding all these clues, connecting all these different people on the train to the murder, all this different stuff. And eventually he figures out who did it in the end. Classic murder mystery. It's the mother of murder mysteries, Agatha Christie, who made this, who wrote the book on this. So it's a classic. The story is a classic. It has every murder mystery aspect to it, and it's really well done in my mind. I think one of my favorite elements about this movie is the cinematography. I've talked about it in a video before about how this is one of those movies I wish I had seen in theaters, because this movie totally would have worked on the big screen. I feel like it's so visually stunning. It was one of those movies where I like to collect the DVDs of movies, because you can get digital copies, you can watch it on streaming sites and stuff like that, but why not have the DVDs of some of these? But with this movie, I had to make sure to get either a 4K or a Blu-ray version of it, because you have to have good quality to properly get this movie, because it's so visually beautiful, along with the sequel, which I'll talk about in another video. But it's visually beautiful. And it's a shame that the first time I ever watched this movie, I watched it on my phone. This is one of those movies you have to watch on at least a laptop. I would recommend trying to put it on a big screen, because it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful, the scenery, the lighting, everything about this movie is just top notch in my mind. I love it. The characters in this movie, I felt like they were well done. There's these different characters played into different roles in this whole thing, and it made it so it really worked with these characters. I could understand each of the characters, and for the most part the dialogue was also good too. There was one moment where in one way the dialogue was bad, but in the other way I liked the dialogue too. And nowadays this would be too pushed out as, oh, this is a woke thing, no one should like this. But I kind of thought it was a pretty fun comeback, was when one of the characters made a comment, because you had this black doctor on the train, and he's like, I don't want his kind sitting in the same train car as me. And some people was like saying, why is that the case? He's like, we don't mix. And then this woman right next to him took her glasses of white wine and red wine and mixed them together and said, I like a good rosé. It was an amazing, I thought that was a pretty good comeback. But also in the same way, it was like, okay, in that moment the dialogue wasn't quite, it felt like it was preachy, but I don't know. I kind of liked that comeback. I thought it was a pretty fun comeback to be like, yeah, mix is good. Mix can be good sometimes. And I get it, a lot of people might not like that line for the reason that we have been pushed so much woke stuff recently in movies that we can't stand when you just have a little reference to, guess what? Times were different back then. Black people didn't have the same opportunities as white people did. So having someone stand up for a black person in that moment was a good thing, in my mind. And it's going to be something I'll talk about when I talk about the sequel, about what my opinions are about that whole thing. So the characters were good. Like I felt the dialogue was good. The cinematography was incredible. The story, I loved it. Is it perfect? No. But it's still good. But with that being said, let's get into the spoiler section of this. So what really, in my mind, was one of the greatest moments, especially the first time watching it, and a lot of people already know the story, so they already know what I'm about to say, but for those who haven't, I recommend you watch the movie because a murder mystery, you don't want to spoil the murder mystery before you watch the movie. It's worth it. But for those who have, basically, as we all know, it turns out in the end, everyone on that train car was involved. Everyone was a part of this murder. And we figure out that the person who got murdered was this really like bad man who like kidnapped a kid and killed them. It's like, he was not a good guy. And these people were all trying to get their revenge on him. And so they managed to all get on the same train at the same time, scheduled up the whole train for that. And they killed him. When the scene where you saw them all like stabbing him, it's like, it's set up for the whole movie that this was the case, but it was like one of those things where it's really interesting to see, like, oh, we weren't supposed to decide who was the killer. The whole time everyone was the killer, which was a really cool thing because then they brought up that whole lesson from the beginning, as I talked about before in the beginning of my video. Hercule Poirot put in such an emphasis on the importance of that balance is important. And so by the end of the movie, when he realizes that sometimes good people do bad things for good reasons, and you can't always keep the balance in that way. Like, he had to let them go because in the way, as he says, you guys are not killers. And so I don't want you guys to go to prison for being killers when you guys were literally just settling the peace. In one way, I can't justify them because, no, killing is never good. But, though I'm not a pacifist, I believe that when you need to go to war, you can go to war. But the point is, killing like that is never the right choice. But in the same way, it had a really great lesson of him, like, realizing at the end of the story, the balance can't always be even. Sometimes you're going to have to allow people who did technically kill someone get away with it because, in the end, they weren't doing it for bad reasons. They were doing it to, set the scales. We had one person who was the son of the lawyer prosecuting the man, and he got away with it. So that son now is wanting to put his father's life goal of getting this man captured and actually pay for his crimes, finally bring that to justice and finally being able to be like, that person is now off the street. They can't hurt anyone ever again. You have the police officer whose lover was killed instead of the man who should have been killed for the crimes of that little girl's death. You have the nanny who was supposed to be watching her, who was drunk and fell asleep so that the guy was able to sneak in and take the kid. You have the grandmother who's wanting to get revenge for the death of her grandchild. You have the godmother who wants to get revenge for, her goddaughter's death. You have all these different characters who play into it in really important ways. And they're all trying to bring justice to someone who never got to seek justice and was able to get away with it. And so in one way, that's not how you do it, but in the same way, that's what Hercule Poirot had to figure out, is what they were doing there was they were just getting the justice that the courts could never give them. And they were finally now able to be at peace, knowing that the man who had done all this was off the streets. So I feel like that was a great way of starting the story, starting the movie with this. You set up, this is how the character works, and then you see him go through a character arc through the movie. And then we go into the sequel and we see that continuing on. I feel like that's a really important thing to remember when writing scripts, writing screenplays, is set up your character and set up some faults he has. Even if, in this case, it came off at first oh, this is his, superpower, this is not his fault, but you see through it, he learns that it actually is a fault that he sometimes need to get over. You sometimes need to banish. So, that's, a really important thing to keep in mind for, screenwriting. It's you can have character arcs from characters that you set up not being super, oh, I have all these fake flaws. No, this person's, flaw was not shown as that big of a flaw until it became the flaw. if you get what I'm saying. So guys, tell me your thoughts. Which version of Murder on the Orient Express do you guys like? Have you guys seen this version? If you guys haven't, and you guys seen the other version, I recommend checking out this version. It's new, it's newer, the visuals are better on it. In my mind, Hercule Poirot is better in this one. He has a better mustache, all this different stuff. But overall, I would strongly recommend this movie to people. It's a really good mystery movie that I just really, really love. And if you guys are going to watch it, I would recommend watching it on a TV or some bigger screen, because watching it on a phone, you can't get the glory out of how beautiful it is. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys haven't yet, if you guys want to see more videos like this, consider subscribing. This has been the Movie Night Reviewer, Peter Wary, signing off.